on the market. You're going to go look at the price of allowances on the market, and then you're going to go look at the price of offsets on the market. And when you've done that calculation, you're going to do the least expensive thing first. Now, frequently, energy efficiency is going to be the least expensive thing. You're going to do a lot of that, even more than you might be required to under the rules. And then you're going to go out and seek out the allowances or the offsets. And the offsets are going to provide you as the utility with the ability to sort of plan and balance your resources. So you know you're going to have to do some upgrade next year or 2 years from now. But in the meantime, maybe it's better, because that equipment is still good, it's better to actually purchase an offset, reduce emissions on that basis, and then do the correct planning from an economic standpoint for the facility upgrades so that you can avoid that economic shock of having to do everything all at once in the beginning. Then you'll have reduced emissions on an overall scale. And I think you'll have achieved the goal of sort of this maximum economic efficiency in getting to the targets that AB 32 sets out.
Yeah, it's an interesting balancing act on that. Did you have any questions, Senator De Leon, before I wait for the panel? Very good. I want to thank you very much for that overview. Very helpful. Now, I'd like to introduce our final stakeholder panel. Bob Lucas is a consultant for the California Council for Economic Environment Balance, also known as CEEB, a business group. He will be followed by Dr. James Fine, economist at the Climate and Air Program for the Environmental Defense Fund, which was one of the original sponsors of AB 32. Then we will hear from Dan Cobb, California Policy Manager at UCS, Union Concerned Scientists, which sponsored Senator De Leon's two offsets bills, AB 1404 and Senate Bill 246. And finally, the offset skeptic person from the Sierra Club, Michael Endicott. They've been very active, and we appreciate their participation in AB 32 implementation, and especially as it relates to forestry offsets, correct? And if it would be all right with you to limit your comments to about 3 minutes each, and then let's see where the conversation takes us, and I'll try not to interrupt. Okay. That'll be hard for me.
Well, my name's Bob.
Thank you for coming.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me. My name is Bob Lucas. I represent the California Council for Environmental and Economic Balance, which is a business, labor, and a public interest group that strives to work on environmental issues and solve them in a way that's good for the economy. And we've been working very hard since the enactment of AB 32 with the Air Resources Board on this, and so I'd also like to extend a thanks over there to Mary Nichols and her staff for their openness and willingness to talk about these issues, because there are a lot of them, and some of them are extremely complex. Yes, CEEB likes offsets. We believe that allowing the use of high-quality offsets as a compliance mechanism will provide geographically broad coverage essential to making the most progress on a global issue, achieve the emissions goal at lower overall cost by providing lower cost compliance options for cap sources, spur technology development and innovation in sectors, sources, and locations within and outside of California not included in cap sectors, build capacity and expertise within and outside the state across a broader set of activities, facilitate earlier emissions reductions by reducing the risks associated with initial years of operation of a cap-and-trade system, help develop accurate reporting methodologies for categories of offset projects, and enhance market liquidity and the success of the program design, giving participants the confidence to buy and sell allowances, including credits for offsets. Offsets have been around a long time. Mistakes have been made. Yep. ARB has corrected them and tightened the rules on protocols, which ARB now adopts on its own. These rules are much stricter than any other in the world, as Mary alluded to earlier today. And in fact, the worry is not that offsets will fail, although some may, as was just pointed out in the prior presentation. It is that there will not be enough. CEEB recommends expedited approval of additional offset protocols prior to the effective date of a cap-and-trade program, so that entities within and without cap sectors have the incentive to begin the planning and investment to get projects online, given the long lead time for project development. Offset and trading markets and regulated commodities do not develop overnight, that require long ramp-ups and system development, investment, and permitting to gain the necessary interest and liquidity. SEEB also recommends that ARB reconsider some of the proposed rules and design features regarding the use of offsets. Some are very complex, as was also alluded to earlier. For example, the proposed rule that would limit the use of offsets to 8% annually within a compliance period, and further require that any unused portion of the 8% offset limit be retired and not carry over to the next year, should be relaxed to allow their use over the entire compliance period.
The 3 years or whatever.
Well, in this case, it's not the 8%, it's the 8% that's viewed on an annual basis, and if you don't use 8% on an annual basis, you have to retire what you didn't use. We think they should be available for the entire 3-year period. Another example of a proposed offset rule that we believe should be reconsidered is the buyer liability provision that requires the buyer of an offset to retain liability for any potential future problem and replace the offset even if the holder was not responsible for the discrepancy. The holder of some of those forestry offsets would not be responsible for some of the things that were just mentioned here by the prior speaker. We know that ARB is working on this. I understand that there is a new discussion draft out on it, and that they are considering things that will provide some help, but still leaves the buyer with a very high risk. SEEB believes that the ARB should seriously consider establishing a compliant buffer account, or as was just referred to a little while ago, an insurance pool that would be funded by a certain percentage of all offset transactions that could be used immediately to replace offsets that for one reason or another fail to perform. The International Emissions Trading Association has proposed such a mechanism. We endorse that mechanism. In summary, SEEB believes that with a small trading market and a short supply of offsets, that some of the existing transaction restrictions, as noted earlier, should be considered for relaxation, and that any potential further restrictions be carefully evaluated for their potential impact on the success of the program. Thank you.
Thank you for bringing that perspective. I figured you were going to mention that percentage of offsets. Okay, following up, a gentleman from EDF. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, members. And thank you for this opportunity. I'm James Fine. I'm an economist with Environmental Defense Fund, and I'm really pleased to have a chance to share my organization's views on offsets. I'm going to make 3 quick points about offsets, and I'm going to try to do so quickly because I know we're approaching the dinner hour, and this microphone
you
is
don't want to get between people and their dinner.
I'm looking more and more like a Twinkie every minute, this microphone. So first and foremost...
Yeah, I know the chair analogy.
High-quality offsets, unlike any other design feature of the Cap and Trade program, have the potential to lower the cost of meeting the goals of the program. My second point is that it gets sectors involved in seeking out and developing the technical basis to achieve reductions in ways that they otherwise wouldn't be able to get involved. And I'll provide some evidence for that statement in my first one, as well as my third point, which is that the real economic opportunity for offsets is already being demonstrated in other markets. It's already delivering environmental benefits, and it's this opportunity that's laying the groundwork for robust certification and tracking systems that are going to be needed in the California program to ensure high-quality offsets. So on the question of how much, in terms of cost to regulated entities, would offsets save in meeting the AB 32 goals, it's a really hard number to estimate with great reliability, but there are some really good studies out there that give us some clues. So what we can do for clues is we could look at other credible estimates of allowance prices with or without offsets. The problem with all the estimates that are out there is that they don't represent the program as designed. So in addition to that, I'm going to provide some findings from EDF's modeling analysis of the program as proposed. In terms of other credible studies, or actually, let me summarize EDF's findings first. You heard Chairwoman Nichols talk about a reserve pool of allowances, this rainy day fund of allowances, and that was set up to provide assurance to regulated entities that should there be kind of a run-up in prices, that there's this pool of allowances available at prices in increments of $40 a ton, $45 a ton, and $50 a ton. So we analyzed the performance of the market representing the uncertainty about the reductions from complementary measures, from offsets, and from regulated sectors in the Cap and Trade program. And what we found is that as proposed with offsets in the program, there's less than a 5% chance that reserve fund would ever be tapped at all, and it will never be exhausted. That is, the reserve fund will be adequate to keep prices below $50 per ton. If, however, the program does not have offsets, there's a 67% chance that the reserve will be insufficient to hold prices below $50 per ton. That is, it will be fully exhausted. There's a two-thirds chance of that. The other way we could look at the value of offsets is by looking at the prevailing allowance price for the program with and without offsets. Credible estimates suggest that the price of allowance can be about $20 per ton if you allow offsets in the program. That's CARB study, and that's many other studies as well. Without offsets, you're looking at prices of about $100 per ton. Now, many folks think that there isn't going to be scarcity in the near term, so it's the price floor that CARB established that's going to be constraining. So if we compare the cost of a program at $10 per ton of allowances with the cost of a program at $100 per ton, and many credible studies have estimated that the program cost would be higher than $100 per ton without offsets. But just comparing $10 per ton with $100 per ton over the 9 years of the program, that's a cost savings of $241 billion. That's 2 years of the California state budget. Of course, offsets offer more than just financial
more than that
benefits. Yeah. That's the general fund, the special fund, and bonds added up. That's $127 million for this year. My second point is that offsets
and
have
probably
already.
have to wrap up the second and third together, just because we'll lose
I'll combine them real
the
quick.
ability to ask questions.
Second point is that offsets have already and will continue to inspire environmentally minded innovation in sectors that otherwise would have no direct role in AB 32. You already heard the example of urban afforestation. I live in an environmental justice community raising 2 children. I'm very excited about foresting my community in East Oakland. Another great example is agricultural sector. It doesn't have a fundamental role in AB 32 as designed, but agricultural interests are now developing the skills and the scientific basis to reliably calculate the air quality benefits of best management practices that also incidentally are going to save agricultural operators money and increase their profits. My third point is that already been largely covered by Gary Giroux, so I won't mention all the ways that CARB is designing its offset program to be significant improvements and demonstrate learning from the European program. I'll just mention one last thought, and that is, as a consumer, I rely on consumer reports to figure out what products are best out there, best bang for the buck, what are the highest quality products. In fact, offset companies such as the Climate Action Reserve and the Gold Standard are already providing this consumer reports type service. And we're leveraging that know-how from the private sector, and in doing so, we're creating what I think will be the gold standard for offsets program worldwide. Thanks for your interest in the time and for your leadership on this issue.
Thanks for the economist perspective here. And thank you very much, Dan, for coming, and UCS for their leadership on all these climate change pieces of legislation. I remember your fans that we did, remember, outside the Capitol.
For AB 32, yes.
And
the Sergeant at Arms is passing around a handout that we have.
Let's go ahead and begin.
So, Madam Chair and Senator De Leon, and I'm sure the many senators who are listening from their office right now, thank you very much for the opportunity to testify. I also want to acknowledge the presence of Dr. Barbara Haya, who's back there to my right, who's done extensive research on the issue of carbon offsets and is available to answer questions after this panel is concluded. First, I want to be clear that UCS fully supports the inclusion of a carefully designed cap-and-trade program as part of the suite of AB 32 policies. That said, we are very concerned about specific design details of cap-and-trade programs, this one included, and that our most significant concern is, of course, the issue of offsets, which is what this panel is about. Now, the cap-and-trade rule that is on track to be adopted later this year would allow, by our estimates, as much as 85% of the emission reductions of a capped entity to be achieved through compliance from offsets. Now, you hear the term 8% of total emissions.
So what
8% of total emissions is their total emissions for the entire year, or a compliance period, whatever they're measuring. But the measurement that is most relevant is their emission reductions. How much do they have to reduce from what they did previously, or what their baseline is, or what their business as usual estimate would be? Emission reductions has always been the key metric in terms of identifying the need and the importance of reducing emissions. I mean, how many emission reductions you need to get from any capped entity. and how many of those reductions can come from what sources. And what we see is in an early draft of the cap and trade regulation, they limited offsets to a very large number, about half. And then in their later draft, initially approved last year, still under consideration for this year, they'd almost doubled that. And so this 8% is really 75, 85. It could be even more. For some entities specifically, it could be more than 85% of their emission reductions. So basically, a lot of the entities, most of them, if not all of them, can do very little reducing their own emissions, even very little trading among the cap sectors, and get almost everything from offsets. That, by our definition, is not a very effective program, especially since
we'll look at.
offsets are risky.
Yeah.
So the largest polluting sectors under the cap are under the cap. Therefore, we should focus our emission reductions by urging innovation and efficiencies by the largest cap sectors. If we allow an expansive use of offsets, that would be
oil refineries. What would be the largest?
The electricity sector, and in the second and third compliance periods, transportation sector.
Okay.
We think the most important and most challenging element of running a high-quality offsets program is ensuring additionality. All the other things you talked about, real, verifiable, those apply for everything. Whether it's offsets or allowances within cap sectors. It's additionality that is the definition of what an offset is. And
over and above what's required.
Above business as usual, above what was going to happen anyway. In fact, that term is specifically called out in AB 32 in its own subdivision. And the experience, as we know, with the largest offsetting program under the Kyoto Protocol shows what could happen if an offset program is poorly designed. The oversight of third-party verifiers there was almost non-existent, which led to widespread fraud. Now, while we certainly acknowledge ARB is trying to learn from the mistakes made by the UN's program, they have not yet publicly approved or shown that they're going to approve a range of procedures that we believe are truly needed to ensure offset credits are actually additional and that the emission reductions calculations are accurately verified. We don't feel what they have on track, while it may be and is better than Kyoto Protocol, it's not good enough. You could say it's the best there is, better than anything else, but if everything else that exists is really horrible, I was going to use a different word that starts with an S, is really horrible, then you're saying it's best against a very low standard. And what they're doing is better, no question about it, but far from what is needed to really ensure additionality. And since they're using an expansive number of offsets, could be 75, 85% or more of total emission reductions, it's very important that we get it right. And we don't think they've gotten it right yet. To ensure the additionality, we need a comprehensive analysis of every protocol that's about to be adopted, as well as periodic reviews after they're adopted. And it has to be a very detailed, grounded analysis that talks about project development, the need to assess what would likely happen versus what is happening, the effect that the offsets program is having versus business as usual, and the procedures of these analyses have not yet been written into any regulation or any published set of procedures. So we don't have a lot of confidence that the procedures to adopt protocols going forward or review them every few years going forward are sufficient. Moreover, a robust and effective process of overseeing offset credit verification is needed to minimize gaming and fraud and ensure overall offset quality. Allowing project developers to hire their own verifiers is risky. Allowing someone other than ARB to have final say over eligibility disputes is a head-scratcher. And it's also very imperative that ARB be required to make every reasonable possible effort to ensure that the same emission reduction credit is not found registered in some other carbon trading regime. And when we asked them about that, we got something of an unclear answer. They don't seem to have a set of procedures set to hook up with other regimes to make sure that a credit in Georgia that it counts for our AB 32 offset program is not going to count somewhere else in the world. So just in closing, I would say that ARB has made a risky decision to allow for a very expansive use of offsets. And that decision necessitates rigorous, staff-intensive, resource-intensive oversight necessary to ensure quality of the program. You can't do offset verification and oversight on the cheap. While the least risky solution would be to put a more stringent quantitative limit, like we had in Mr. De Leon's bill a couple of years ago that was passed by this legislature but vetoed, short of that, we would say there needs to be a much improved set of protocol development procedures, analysis and review, and verification procedures of the actual projects.
Right.
Managing an offsets program without rigorous verification oversight could undermine the integrity of the overall program. And if we care about the repercussions and the media reports of those repercussions and the results of the program, we have to care about moving to other states, eventually getting a national program, and we need to make sure people evaluate and see this program effectively. And I think the way it's set up now, they're part of the way there, but they're not fully there yet. So we want to thank ARB for the good work, but they have more work to do this year.
More work to do. Maybe that additional year could be helpful. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I appreciate that. Thank you. And last but not least,
Michael Endicott with Sierra Club,
the
California.
last person between dinner.
That's right, and well past your half-hour end time,
Yes,
too, I see as well.
right.
The sergeant's passing out a packet then for a take-home puppet while you're lying there in bed and reading all of the other interesting bill analyses that you have to do on the budget, etc. You can lay this on your chest, and the message will be clear. There's also in there our general letter, which echoes some of the other points that other people have raised to show that we join them, but I won't go into them. I'll just incorporate them by reference. And then the last one is an article about Battle Creek, which is not an offset program, but is to show you that the offset program operates in the context of a real world, and we cannot ignore the other consequences of a program. So let me start. Michael Endicott with Sierra Club, California. I'm here as an advocate for the members of Sierra Club, but also for the people that are up in the High Sierras who have a lot of interest in this issue as well. We want to be clear that we are very strong and early supportive of the chair's efforts to get AB 32 passed, and we worked very hard, and our members did too, to oppose Proposition 23 that would have suspended that law and obstructed the development of a clean energy economy, which is what we all want. We do not oppose per se a program that contains cap and trade in it, but we are extremely concerned that the current proposed regulations contain provisions that have the potential to seriously undermine the program's chief purpose to reduce carbon emissions to the atmosphere and pushing us past the tipping point. It will also have opportunity costs in that it delays the development of jobs and technologies here in California and also redirects efforts from addressing the specific issues that Senator De Leon and others on this panel have discussed already. I'm not going to talk about the big picture, but I want to emphasize why it's so important that your committee is looking at this. We have three agencies essentially looking at it. We have the legislature that passed the law, we have the Air Resources Board that is in charge of implementing it, and then we have the nonprofit, the Climate Action Reserve. I'm not casting aspersions at any of these components at all, but the key part of it is that there are many sliding pieces in here, and this is why the legislature's oversight is so important. Not all offsets are created equal. And it is true that the protocols say specifically that we have to have the reduction or avoidance of greenhouse gas emissions or make sure that what we do is quantifiable, permanent, verifiable, and enforceable, certain to happen. One of the things that in doing this as we write these laws, we start to believe that they're actually real, that they're like the laws of nature or gravity. And we start calling things gold standards. But there are a lot of presumptions that are made in good faith and presumptions of things that we would like to see happen, and that carbon will remain sequestered. But as I said, not all offsets are created equal. In the Forestry Protocol, for instance, there are actually 5 methods of offsets that are possibilities in the program. And there were 70 groups that participated at the Air Resources Board hearing saying that we support going forward with 4 of the 5. And there were 70 groups that said we do not support going forward at this time with 1 of the 5 in the first phase. And that is the one that allows clear cutting to be qualified as a method of sequestering carbon. The other 4 that are in there are reforestation projects, where you had a big fire already. Avoidance of conversion, which has a big presumption. The person says, my land's going to be developed, but you can pay me not to develop it.
We're working on that.
Right, but there are presumptions involved in it, and that's how we say it's a good effort. We understand the purpose of that, and we'll support it because there's no risk, a lower risk on the downside. The other one talked about natural forest management techniques, which is very clearly defined in the law, that emphasizes diversity of age and diversity of species, something that we generally think of natural forest management techniques, which for gross purposes I'm going to call natural forest management versus clear cutting. And then the other one was urban forestry, so that you can, planting trees in your home. The least certain way to try and sequester increased amounts of carbon is to offset current and ongoing greenhouse gas releases. Because if you actually reduce that, then you would actually not have to ever deal with it down the road. When you start to put it in your forest, where other natural events can occur and then release the carbon, you're starting to play with large equations and insurance pools and policies and presumptions that something will be paid back. But on the other hand, some offsets, in addition to being less certain and more expensive to track and verify, have a greater potential to aggravate environmental and public harm through subsidizing aggressive business practices that operate on the edge of regulatory limits and nature's carrying capacity. We think that we should be sequestering them in a manner that promotes, maybe in these forestry techniques, these other ones, keep you away from that edge, away from the derivatives, away from the shall we say, below market interest rates that got us in trouble with the real estate market. When you start to move to clear cutting, we're not trying to change policy in the state through the Air Resources Board's actions. But it aggressively pushes all of nature's boundaries, in addition to be an increased emission source in the near term when harvesting happens. Clear-cutting practices release, depending on how you do it in each project, a certain amount of carbon from the soil. And that can actually be more than is sequestered in the actual trees. There actually can be an increased use of pesticides, which actually also, again, can increase the amount of greenhouse gases that you're emitting. And it encourages the conversion from a natural forest or diverse age, diverse species forest into a tree plantation. So what we asked is, at least in Phase 1 and Phase 2, that clear cutting not be included in those protocols, which it was admitted that we don't have the ability to calculate what is the actual carbon that's being released at a given time in the way that we might otherwise do, because soil carbon is problematic. White papers have been done on that, but we haven't finished it.
And I'm going to ask you to sum up, but on the issue of clear cutting and forestry protocols, that will be something probably for another topic, another day, where we can spend some more time on understanding why that was put in.
I appreciate it, but we need to pay close attention to the quality of the carbon offsets if they're going to be considered a transition substitute. And so I guess in the end, I just ask you to remember that the forests are the lungs of the earth, and that you cannot clear-cut your way out of climate change, and we ask you to please not try, at least in the launch of this program. We don't ask you to end the program, but we do ask you to mend the program. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much for excellent presentations. I'm not going to ask questions, because I understand that there's a variety of points of view on this particular issue, and offsets will continue to be an important issue that will be addressed not only at the August 24th hearing, but I assume through stakeholder process. But you did point out very succinctly the importance and the role of the legislature to provide oversight as we work through this process over the next several years. And it is increasing a challenge, because this is something that's going to be many years long, and with term limits we have constant turnover and the ability to ramp up new members to understand all this, let alone the vocabulary, the acronyms, and everything else that goes with it. Important points that you brought up. I appreciate that very much. I hope the people listening to this or watching it on television also appreciated the expertise you brought to the discussion. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
And last but not least, since I am up here, with staff, but there are a few members of the audience that wish, just for the record, to spend 2 minutes each with some testimony. But I would like to say that, of course, putting any comments you have in writing is always welcome and helpful. We can have them or send them to CARB. Ms. Nichols started the program with letting you know that there will be a hearing on August 24th. They have an excellent website. Find out how else you can register your comments or provide your opinion. Let me see if anyone's here from these groups. And if you come forward, your name, your organization, and limit your comments to 2 minutes. Joaquin Sanchez, Lillian Molina, Jeff Conant, or David Bichelle. Are any of those 4 people here? If so, come on down. And if I rudely cut you off after 2 minutes, I apologize, but it is what it is. Thank you very much, and I hope the 2 hours were instructive to you as well as to me. I learned a lot. And are you Joaquin?
I'm Joaquin.
You're up first.
Good evening, Senator Pavlian, committee members. I just want to begin by thanking you for the opportunity and the venue to amplify a message that has not been circulated enough within these halls or within this space as it relates to cap and trade. My name is Joaquin Sanchez. I am with Crossroots Initiative, and I'm working with a coalition and representing a coalition of environmental justice groups that are committed to continue lifting California forward by stopping cap and trade and implementing AB 32 equitably. On June 24, 2011, the Appellate Court issued a stay order allowing the California Air Resources Board to move ahead in the erroneous planning of cap and trade program, jeopardizing AB 32, California's landmark global warming solutions law. AB 32 has given us an opportunity of a generation to preserve our species and transform California's economy. We also know that cap and trade failed in Europe, and we don't have the luxury to test a failed idea, quite frankly. There's a wealth of policy options available at our fingertips that will achieve the goals of AB 32, and it does not include the creation of a bogus market, carbon market. There's a better way, and we recognize that Mary Nichols has taken us down an unsustainable path, and it can lead potentially to a destructive path. There's a better way, and we'd like to see Governor Brown and legislators step up the game and step in and direct the ARB to put a hold on cap and trade as it stands. Communities.
All right. With that, I want to thank you for your testimony. And if you're welcome to turn things in writing,
okay.
Perhaps the 1-year pause on the enforcement will also allow a longer period of discussion.
That's right.
As you said, thank you for. And where are you based? Where's Crossroots based?
We're in Oakland.
In Oakland. Thank you so much. Lillian.
Good afternoon, and thank you for this opportunity. My name is Lillian Molina, and I'm the Environmental Justice Director with the Energy Action Coalition. We're a coalition based in D.C. with over 40 different partners, and we are here specifically to support environmental justice communities. We hosted a conference in D.C. where over 10,000 young people came and were trained in organizing, and we're really looking to California to lead us in a bold and aggressive manner through this climate and ecological crisis that we see ourselves in. So we are here in support, again, of the environmental justice communities that are most impacted by false solutions. So we do not want to see the California Air Resource Board adopt cap and trade as a main mitigation system or mechanism for addressing climate change. We want to urge them to look at other mechanisms that will not harm communities of color and low-income communities and increase the disparities that are already prevalent. And again, we have a vast and wide network, and we work very closely with communities in California, such as the Wilmington, Carson community that has
Marquez, yes.
A large disproportionate health burdens due to the refineries that would be capped, but we don't want to provide them with opportunities to create safeguards for them to continue polluting disproportionately.
Thank you very much for your testimony. And you're David?
Dave Bishop.
Before you start, the last two people were, can't read it, Anthony Thomas, maybe? Or Helen Dowden. Were you signed up, Ms. Holmes-Jen? Okay, I'll just add you to the name. And so I'll excuse Lillian and Joaquin, and thank you. All right, David.
Madam Chair, thank you. My name is David Bishel, President of the California Forestry Association. I'd like to express our strong support for the protocols as well as the cap and trade program. I personally was a member of the CAR work group that spent nearly 2 years creating the forestry protocol. And as you can well imagine, the issue of even age management and the use of clear cutting as a regeneration tool for forestry was a huge part of that discussion. All of the mandates, and I gave you a brief summary there of a number of the mandates that are required by law from a reforestation perspective, a buffer perspective, a stream protection zone, doing long-term planning, sustained yield planning. Under the protocol, a landowner has to ensure that 100% of the standing inventory that they start with is there for 100 years, that they cannot, in fact, include any activity that was mandated and is mandated by the California Forest Practice rules and regulations, and ultimately that you have to replace every single ton of wood that is harvested from a property before you can even start considering additionality. There was a lot of process that went into this, and even age management is a methodology that is used to regenerate forests, to be able to replace forests with species that will, in fact, also be resistant to climate change over the long term, and as well as drought and other natural disturbances. I would like to just conclude now, because this is a difficult time, but I would certainly offer to sit down with you and talk about
issue,
this. Absolutely.
And I guess you're welcome to come into my office, but one thing that many of us trying to grapple with is whether we're doing, more like replacing forests with tree farms that cut down, or whether we're creating, wilderness areas in the state that people treasure as well. All trade-offs. I appreciate it, and I welcome a long conversation. And
well, I would appreciate to do that.
At 6
Thank
p.m.
you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Thomas.
Good afternoon, Senator. Let me just open and close very quickly, because I know that the time is short, and just remind everyone who is within earshot that California has, and arguably the most and strongest environmental laws in the nation, arguably, without doubt. And the industry that was referred to by one of the speakers here challenges that, it seems, in our opinion. But that being the case, we followed them to the T and diligently. And I would remind everyone within earshot that we do that with pride. I would also like to close by saying that many a time there's always erroneous statements about our industry, and it's about that time that we begin to challenge those statements as they come, and we are here to challenge them today, and we are more than willing to meet with you and to show you, and even have that proponent or that opponent sit right beside us, and as they bring up an issue, have us respond. So we need to stop this and begin to work together to do everything that we can to not only continue clean air, but to protect our environment. And thank you again, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And maybe with additional legislators, we might take you up on that office of in a hearing process so we can understand it. Thank you very much for staying so long. Appreciate it. Last but not least, Bonnie Holmgren.
Thank you, Chairwoman Pavley and members. Thank you very much for having this hearing. It's been extremely helpful in fleshing out issues with the Cap and Trade Program. We greatly appreciate your role in ensuring strong legislative oversight. Just 3 points I wanted to make. And first of all, that the American Lung Association in California is strongly committed to a strong AB 32 implementation strategy in California, not only to reach our global warming targets, but as a key element of our state efforts to ratchet down on criteria pollution and to meet our federal Clean Air Act standards. And as you know, since global warming worsens ozone and PM pollution, it makes it harder to reach our federal targets, and it reduces the effectiveness of the investments that we're making now and that we plan to make in regulations and controls to ratchet down on emissions from transportation and industry sources. There's a climate penalty, and so we need to overcome that and move forward on AB 32. And as part of that, we support putting a price on carbon, and we support moving forward on a strong cap and trade program that includes investments in air quality and community health improvement. And our goal with the American Lung Association has been to ensure that the cap and trade program maximizes public health benefits while keeping California on track to meet our state global warming targets. And in that regard, we think it's important to keep looking at several of the issues that have been brought up today, including ensuring appropriate limits on offsets, promoting offsets that benefit impacted communities, establishing and ensuring that the Community Benefits Fund indeed does get going as quickly as possible, and ensuring that the ARB does move forward quickly on regulatory controls in the industrial sector. These have all been brought up today, and we think there are some great some opportunities to look at some adjustments to strengthen the cap-and-trade program over the next month and before the implementation of the program. So those are basically the comments I wanted to make, and I think this hearing and your role and oversight is very helpful. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bonnie, and thank you for being involved in this process. 11 years I've been around the legislative cycle.
Yes.
I think the first big bill your American Lung Association really got out in front of was the tailpipe emission bill, and you've been the leader on this issue this whole time, so thank you very much.
Yes, thank you for all your efforts. We're so really excited about the public health community's engagement in this.
Anyway, I want to thank everyone here who came. Really informative for myself. We got it all on tape. Quite a few members came and went, and we have a lot of work to do collectively. Have a great evening.